This week we are finishing up with Chapter 3, more advanced visualizations, and there's a couple things that I wanted to show you guys. First, you'll notice in the book that the bar widths are quite a bit different than what you might get by default. If you'd like to change that, you can go to the Format menu and then Cell Size and click Taller, and in this case it gives me the keyboard shortcut, which is what I'm going to use, and I can then make these look a lot more like they do in the book. So if you missed that, that's how to do that. And then they walk through how to create a stacked bar chart with the percent totals instead of the sums that you see here, so that you can more readily assess the proportion of patients that are high risk and compare that proportion across each department. So to do that, one thing to quickly copy this field here is to click Option or Command on a Mac and then just drag it over. And then now we have duplicated the bar chart here. Then we're going to use the drop-down menu from the second number of patients field that we just created here and click Quick Table Calculation, percent of total. Okay, and then using that same drop down menu, we're going to come here and click Compute Using and then select Patient Risk Profile. Okay, so there we go. And now we can see that the values are going to add up to 100% for each of the departments on that right graphic. Then if we wanted to turn on labels, we can come up here and just click the text button there. And now we can see the actual counts and percentages. Another thing to note when we're looking at circle charts is that by default, when we pull a measure over to our table, it will choose sum. And so for this visualization, we want to see the average days in hospital. So just make sure that you check that and that it's calculating what you want it to when you pull those measures over. And then you also have some options over here in the Analytics tab. And one of those is an average line. And you can drag this over and add a reference line. In this case, we don't want an average for the whole table or pane. We want it for the cell. So when we do that, we get this additional marker here to provide more information for our visualization. Let's say now that we would rather see this as a box plot. To do that, we're still in the Analytics tab, and we can drag this over, and then now we have a really nice box and whisker plot, which gives us even more information about this data. From the plot here, and you can see this in your textbook as well, we still have our average line. The dark gray box is the lower quartile, and the light gray box is the upper quartile. So combined together, the gray box in total is the interquartile range. And then the whiskers extend to 1.5 times the interquartile range. And then if we had outliers, then we might see them outside of that interquartile range. But in this particular visualization, we don't have any instances of that occurring. Another thing to keep in mind when we create histograms is that we may or need to consider the bin width and the bins and changing those to better match our data. So there's a couple of rules of thumb out there for how to determine bin count and bin width. I like to use this fairly simple one. So I went to the data set and I calculated the number of data points, which is just the count, and then the max and min for the what's being measured here, which is minutes to service. So the longest minutes to service was 44 and the lowest was 4. And then the formula is simply to get the ideal bin count, you would take the square root of the number of data points. In this case, and then you round up, so 80 in this case. And then to get bin width from that, we can just take the max minus the min and then divide by the number of bins. So in this case, it works out to 0.5. So if we go back to our visualization here, if we want to change the bin width, we can come over here to the data pane, minutes to service bin, and click edit. And then you can see here that we have bin size of 2. So if we change that to 0.5, and also when you do this, your min and max values are here as well. So that's another quick way to get that information. So I'll click OK. And this looks good. Actually, I can more easily see my distribution. It is somewhat up to personal preference, how many bins you have, but that's a good place to start. And then I can actually fill in some of this space here by coming over to the size and making these wider. So I'm going to do that because I think that looks better. And yeah, so now we've adjusted the bin size. Sometimes you'll have to think about what it is exactly that you're displaying. If, for example, you're doing a histogram and you're showing groups by age, you might specifically want to show 5-year age increments or 10-year, and so then you would set it up that way. But if you have a data set like this, the rule of thumb that I showed you is a really great one for figuring out what is the right amount of bins. The last items you're going to work with in this chapter are dual axes, which can be very useful visualizations as well, especially if you want to show a lot of information without having to use multiple charts. And then once you've completed that, we'll be done with chapter 3, and we've covered quite a lot in this chapter in terms of different types of visualizations, but also just getting familiar with other techniques like calculated fields, mark types, manipulating the axes, and then some tips and tricks that I've shown you in last week's video and in this week's video. So as we move on, we'll begin working more with calculations and parameters, and that will give us a whole new group of methodologies that will help us analyze our data and do some really cool visualizations within Tableau, things that are a little bit above and beyond kind of just your standard charts.